with video cameras and technology and language, it all just kind of runs together. So it's kind of hard for me to even put a label on what I do. So oftentimes that leads to identity crises. So I just kind of say, yeah, I'm a writer and artist, but I don't actually know what I do.
For sure. I definitely see a lot of multimedia in your work. And I think that, that speaks true with the fact that you're doing both our visual art show and our performing arts show this year. So I think it's really wonderful to, kind of dip your foot into all of them. Yeah. So what is everyone's experience with the Fringe Festival, whether it's Casey Fringe or other festivals? I know some people have kind of talked about that a little, but if anyone wants to go more in depth on their experiences, that would be great.
And I'm happy to go.
I'll jump on
Oh,
that. Oh, sorry.
nope, you go, Phillip.
You go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay, so this is, I think, my sixth show, and I started with a personal story, kind of family stuff. I think of it as, let's see, the impact of silence and tragedy on a family. And then I went from there into the next show, the impact of innocence and something else. I can't remember exactly what, but on sexuality. And it's just each show kind of ran into the next. And there was let's see, and then I actually was tired of all my family stuff and turned to the Loathly Lady, which is an Arthurian tale, many variants, and decided to tell that from the woman's point of view, because despite that it's named for her, she's just basically a plot device. And I was curious what her story was. And so it's interesting because I feel like stories kind of come through my body, and I don't always know until I start, feeling my way into them. And so yeah. And then last year I did a couple of one personal tale and a couple of tales called What a Woman. No, that was the first one. What a Woman Wants was the Local Lady. And then my memory, at any rate, did one last year about just focused on women, a couple of tales, and then threw one of my own in. So this year I'm back to the personal tale, but I was really taken by, I love ghost stories. And so the first one in my show this year is one that I heard when I was a kid, and I always wanted to tell it and could not get it. And finally, I'm like, what is your version of this? And it ended up weaving it all into the personal story, which ends with another ghost story that I had read when I was much younger as well. So ghost stories you just can't beat them. So that's my Fringe experience, but it made all the difference for me as an artist. And I initially thought it was like the ultimate thing to be in the Fringe. And I thought, no, the Fringe is really a launching pad where you get to try stuff out. And so that's been my experience with Fringe.
That's what I really love about Fringe, is that you get to see such unique stuff here too, is because it does give artists, it gives new artists the opportunity to finally put their work on the stage, or even more established artists, it gives them a chance to do whatever they want that maybe they might have an opportunity to do at a different theater. So you get to see really wonderful, new, unique work. And I love that about our festival. And then Phillip, did you want to share next?
Yeah, totally. No, I'm a total missionary for Fringe. My first Fringe festival was back in 2004. My first Kansas City Fringe festival was in 2008. So I've done the circuit. I'm such a believer in this and in this whole structure. And I think a lot of it just boils down to you know no matter how bad your idea is, you can buy your way back in next year. and there are so few places like that. I mean, in the vast bulk of places, if you do something terrible, you will not be invited back. And but Fringe is a place where I can take my terrible idea and I can play it to the hilt, and if it doesn't land, I get to come back next year and try my next terrible idea, which I truly think there's something profound and beautiful in that I still swear by. So
I honestly think that brings up a great point. I think there's something golden in creating that art, and you just don't know until you put it out there. But out of that could become something beautiful. Maybe that work is in itself is beautiful, or maybe you learn something from it. Maybe you learn a lot from it, and then you can just take that into your next piece and make something even more wonderful. So I think that's a really interesting perspective that is true. So thank you, Bill.
Actually, I have a question for Phillip, following up on that. Your short film, just because it's a video, just because that's what we're doing, there are like, how many stories in it? Do I remember about 5 of them?
4.
4. How many do you normally do in a live festival, since you've been doing this for so long?
Those, I mean, that was this one is a relatively new show. What I've uploaded to the Kansas City Fringe is a recording of a live stream that I did for the Minnesota Fringe last year. Although all 4 stories have been in front of a live audience in some form or another at some point, even if
but when you're doing it live in front of people, in the same room, how long do you usually go? Your 4 stories took about an hour and 10 or something like that. Is that?
Oh yeah. This would be beyond a typical Fringe slot. So because Fringe slot's 60 minutes. My show's the show I uploaded to KC Fringe this year is 70. So it's yeah. I mean, if I were to do this for a live Fringe, it would face some heavy cuts. I would either pull out a story entirely, or I would run through with the hedge clippers and trim mightily throughout. But no.
I'm glad the virtual Fringe gives you that opportunity to, have those extra minutes. Yes, Alexej, did you want to share?
Oh, I was just gonna, kind of say something in response to what Phillip said that I agree with. See, I'm very much an experimentalist, and I just hate how so much stuff, particularly in the visual arts, is so. I feel like, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I feel like so many people have a stick up their ass, and I feel like it's just like so carefully curated to the point of it being uninteresting. And I like experimenting, and I like making weird stuff, and I like not apologizing for it. And it's harder to do that in a lot of it's certainly very difficult to do that in a lot of more mainstream art galleries or certainly in blue chip galleries. But in like a Fringe Fest or in the performing world or in film, you have more latitude than you do in the visual arts, I think. It depends on what your goals are, but
yeah. And I'm totally one of those guys too that in live Fringe festivals, I will see shows at random. I'll just sort of pick a venue and plan down there and just see everything. And I'm a total open mic addict too. I want to not prep or curate or vet, and I want to see what people are doing. And I tell this to people, and they say, but isn't a lot of what you see terrible? And the answer is yes. I mean, a lot of it is, and it's totally worth it. It's,
Absolutely. And yeah, with other commercial theaters or just even other festivals, like there is a lot of curation that goes through it to have your piece selected, to even just get in the door of like the process. And then, you know, maybe they make changes to try to make it more, you know, to appeal more to audiences, to make more money. But sometimes, like, what are you losing in trying to, you know, have this wide appeal? And this just, I love Fringe. Like, it's the people's work for sure. So it's really great to see. And there's just, there's just a taste for everything. So like, that's why I do recommend like the day passes for this year's festival, because like, you can just watch a whole lot of whatever you want and just try a little bit of everything.
So yeah, I'll definitely say too. I was I was a theater critic for several years, and I know there's definitely this strain of criticism that people complain about, where people just tend to dive on novelty or anything sort of outrageous or bizarre, and I really think it's just born out of when you expose yourself to a vast amount of material. Anything that you don't expect is really exciting. Like it definitely reaches the point where you see show after show, and you know, in the first 5 minutes you sort of go, I know exactly where this is going. That, like, when you sit down in a show and you have no idea where it's going, that's exciting. That's great.
Yeah, I this is sort of unrelated, but sort of related. When people always ask me to describe, you know, the themes in my work, I say it always kind of alternates between absurdist, like kind of an absurdist farce or absurdist satire, and like, you know, the kind of like poetical and philosophical explorations that will need you like kind of like wanting a hit from a bong before you go to sleep at night, you know. And I that's so I definitely Terry Gilliam is a hero of mine for sure. You know, that kind of, I love the kind of madcap energy, and they mentioned the bizarreness and the this sort of, I get what you're saying, dude. I like it.
Thank you, guys. And then I have a question specific for Alexej. You mentioned in the show description for creating Joy of Life, the first short film, how it was created over 3 years. Did you kind of plan out that piece, or did it just kind of evolve and transform as you yourself were going through life?
Okay, so well, we were originally talking about kind of experimentalism and how things can fail or fall apart and what comes of that. That project was never supposed to be what it became. That project started it was actually 2019, and I was working with a filmmaking colleague, and she was the executive producer on that film. And it was originally supposed to be just a video art piece about some of my Catholic friends in Kansas City, Kansas, having dinner at a monastery after a mass there or something. It was going to be in black and white, and it was going to be, there's going to be music, and it was just going to be very kind of short, and you know, but then, as is kind of my unwilling custom, I had many nervous breakdowns, and this is what I was left with, was like all this random footage. And I just kind of, you know, at one point I just let the camera roll during one night when I was, you know, hearing a lot of voices and all that stuff. And eventually I talked to my my colleague, the executive producer, and she just said, well, like, edit it. And so I did. I came back with the edited footage, and she goes, this is actually really interesting. You know, she goes, this is kind of actually a really interesting piece. And she commented on kind of the ambiguity of it, and also kind of the way that it was kind of relatable to a lot of people, you know, because it was kind of speaking to like a lot of like themes, I think, of alienation and a lot of isolation, I guess. And yeah, but I mean, the whole thing with all the random footage, that was just me because I was a little out of it. It wasn't what I intended, but oftentimes what you don't intend can make for even more interesting art. So yeah, that's the way it went, and I'm relatively pleased with the results. I definitely like the writing in it.
That's wonderful. I think everything you said, I finished watching Alexej's piece, and I think everything you said rings really true. And it is very experimental. And I think, yeah, you just kind of get an insight of like how people are feeling. And so I do recommend that piece as one of everyone's pieces here today. But yeah, thank you. That's a really interesting insight. I'm glad it got to evolve into something completely new.
If you don't mind, I've got a question for Jaime, actually, having just watched her show recently, because it's this really artful mix of stuff. It's it's childhood memories and ghost stories, but from my point of view, having just watched it, I think one of the real cores to it is your relationship with your father, positive, negative, as complicated as that is. I wanted to ask you, do you have a sense of how your father would respond to watching this show?
Well, my dad doesn't hear very well, so there's that. I don't know. I doubt well, essentially. Interestingly enough, my mom actually saw the middle piece, and I was a little anxious about that, but it's like something shifted in our relationship after she saw that, because I've kind of just like haven't shared a lot of it.
Is that Orlando, the middle piece?
Yeah. So, but yeah, I don't think particularly well, and it's not designed to hurt my dad. It's not that. It's just trying to show the relationship. I did share the last piece with him, and that was kind of like that bridge the divide piece that I was trying to do. I'm not even sure he'd be okay with the fact that I think we have a divide, even though it's been so very clear. So the reality piece is not necessarily how we roll. Does that answer?
No, and I definitely have a selfish investment in it. Like one of my first storytelling shows was about my father, and the taboo. I'm Chinese, and there's definitely like a taboo about sharing family drama publicly. And because I remember my experience of that, I asked my mother first, should I do this show? And she said, well, wait till he dies first. And then, I didn't.
Yeah.
And so I just decided not to tell him about it. And then for one of the shows, I was driving up to perform, and I saw both my parents standing in line. And I remember thinking very clearly, I could just twist the wheel like this, and then I could die, and I wouldn't have to perform the show.
Yeah.
So watching someone doing a very intimate show about that kind of relationship, it piqued my interest in terms of how the hell you navigate that kind of thing.
Yeah. Interestingly, the filming part of it makes a difference, because the first two shows I did about family stuff, and they're never going to see them. But there's, that changes. And I actually did share it with my mom. I said, I'm doing this. So I can let you know after she watches it how that went. So yeah, there's that.
I think that's always such an interesting concept, is because I myself am not a playwright or anything, but for playwrights or just any writer, I feel like the most interesting stuff does come from your life, and that may be family drama, relationship drama, personal trauma, just anything. And that's just so hard to put out there. And then to have people watch that, and then have people watch that. Like, I just think would be a terrifying process, but that's how you make great work. So I know I would have a hard time finding that balance. And Jaime, you mentioned how filming this piece affects it. Since you were in the festival last year. How does participating this year, having more time to prepare for the festival, but how does participating in a virtual festival this year differ from last year for you?
Yeah, actually last year I just filmed myself and I'm like, never doing that again. So I had a professional guy do the filming, Denny Day. And I really like that part. The reason I waited so long last year is because for me, a story is kind of always evolving until you get on the stage. And certainly the last live performance kept evolving until the last 2 or 3 performances of it. And so I was like, I know the show really isn't ready for another month and a half. It's not quite in its final form. I can feel that. But that could be the part of, a storyteller. It keeps evolving, and it's when you have a live audience, it's always changing, and you're playing off of them. And so this time, Denny set everything up, and then he disappeared, and I'm like, who am I supposed to be talking to? And and so that was a bit of a challenge. I've got 3 cameras, and I'm like, okay, I'll take turns pretending they're people, and I'll tell them my story. But it's different without a live audience.
It is different, and I just have to compliment you on how well you did that, and what you did with the editing. It was very convincing that you were talking to a room.
Okay.
A room full of people, that you had people in mind, you had faces you were talking to, you had things that you wanted to bounce off of them. I think it came across beautifully.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, I loved the way you played with the camera as well. Did you have someone else film that, or?
I filmed it myself, but I had been
Okay.
working with my director, Jenny Mersine, for over a year. She helped me with it last year when we did it for Reykjavik on cam. And essentially, there was something you said early on. You said that stories come from your body, and I wrote that down here because that's the way the voices that I do, they just sort of arise over time. When I'm finished writing a piece and then I memorize it, which is a pain in the neck. But then I'm starting to recite it just during my day. The voices of the characters just sort of begin to make an appearance, and then it becomes a stronger and a stronger appearance as the weeks go by. So if you saw it, then you heard the priest, you heard Gryla. Since I did that recording, the mother of the little boy has a much more distinct voice than she used to. It just evolves over time, and these people become realer and realer. It's very organic, and it comes straight out of yourself.
Yeah. And your face was different for each character. It was clear you could follow who was in the room as you were doing.
I'm going to credit my director on that.
Okay.
Again, I'll never go back to. This is the longest story that I had written up to that point. Most of my stuff was around 20 minutes. This is just over 30. So it had gotten to the point where I could feel it sagging when I told it, because I didn't know how to keep it strong all the way through. So working with Jenny has been very next level.
That's awesome. That's awesome to think about. Yeah, and my sense was that that's a script. I mean, you memorized it. Yeah. That I was like, oh my God, I can't even imagine that.
It's honestly, at this point, I'm just hoping it's going to stave off Alzheimer's, memorizing long poems.
Excellent. Yeah. What about you, Phillip? Because you, I love the energy of yours. It was just like, you just kept coming. I was like, dude, take a breath. But I love the way it rolled. It felt so natural. And I wondered for you, are you memorizing? Does it shift around for you?
There's definitely changes. I do work with notes, so it's generally about like half memorized, half referred to. so there's sort of a constant rewriting process as I'm performing it. One thing I wanted to feel you guys out for is so I've mainly been doing live streaming over the past year. This is one of the not the only one, but one of the few festivals I've done that's wholly pre-recorded. And my experience of this process has been, when I'm doing a live stream, you know, I hit broadcast or whatever, I go out, I crack a few jokes, I stumble, I keep moving, it's a fun show. When I pre-record, I hit record, I say 2 lines, stumble over a word, panic, swear at myself, hit stop, start again, and just do that. It takes me like 5 times as long. I become just obsessively perfectionistic with a pre-recorded show. I don't know if you guys experienced that or struggled with that, or if that's my particular neurosis.
You know, I started out as a musician, which is another long story and a long time ago. One of my favorite places to be was the recording studio. But what happens in the studio is you get nervous in reverse. Instead of playing for an audience where you're terrified, and then you walk out on stage and you're about 12 bars into the piece and you're fine. In the studio, you're 12 bars in and you go, hey, this is going pretty well. And then as you get deeper and deeper into the piece, you're going to go, I'm going to screw this up and we're going to have to kill this take. And as you get toward the end of the piece, you're terrified that you're going to miss a note and ruin a 20-minute take. So it's been an interesting experience. But I agree with you absolutely. It's like you do a little bit, you screw it up, and you go take a break because there's only so much you can accomplish.
Yeah, and that's how mine went last year. I kept stopping. And this year I forgot that you could do that. So I started the whole first piece and I'm like, I'm stumbling through this. I'm like, you could have just said, stop, we're going to start over. And so I just forgot. So we just kept going.
So you're an interesting contrasting case, Alexej, because like you're recording yourself, but what you're recording, you're trying to capture like the rawness of this emotional moment. Like you're not trying to create a polished written performance. You're trying to capture like this emotional state. You know?
Yeah. So I guess that's a difference that in so a lot of I mean, first of all, I'm not a perfectionist at all. That's just not in my DNA. But I mean, part of it was like, with the spoken word piece, like the poetry and Joy of Life, that was basically just kind of just kind of like a spontaneous poetry over. But that was after I had the footage and after I kind of had these thematic elements. It was just kind of like throwing everything at the canvas and then cleaning up the mess. So it wasn't. I feel like I wasn't having to deal with as many moving pieces as you all were, because I was kind of approaching it in a more asynchronous way. And then the last bit, the kind of short conversational interview piece, was just me talking with a friend while I drank a milkshake. So it was definitely for me. I think the probably the most the problem I ran into the problem that I ran into the biggest problem that I ran into was deciding how to arrange all the random footage, and to make it work. Because so much of any kind of even like a nonlinear video narrative is all in the editing. So that's kind of where I ran into trouble. They had so much random footage. So that was probably the hardest part for me.
Well, it's interesting because one of the most arresting sections is that very long sort of despairing passage in the middle of it, and I imagine there'd have to be some temptation to trim it or to shape it, and but the instinct to just leave it and let it be this long, uncomfortable.
Yeah, so I did not trim that. I don't think I did trim that. I don't remember exactly. Well, see, that was a really interesting part of it because that was kind of blending kind of like, more method kind of art with like concept art, because it was like that was an instance in which something real was going on where I just kind of left the camera running. So there's kind of that method component, and then there's also the concept kind of of what was going on, kind of complementing it. And for that, I mean, that was just me filming myself during a bad night of psychosis. And I just turned the camera on myself. And it was actually kind of more of like almost like a video diary entry for that particular night. And I just used it in the film.
Well, thank you guys. I love hearing about the different processes. And I think this year, a year after COVID, our artists have just had so much more time to experiment with digital format. And I really, for this year's festival, I do see kind of a evolution with the pieces kind of across the board as artists get much more used to this medium. And I know too, like, even once Casey Fringe returns to in-person, and I know some festivals are in person now, we want to keep this digital component. So, and then like with your piece, Alexej, like that's something that does, does work with the digital format versus some pieces, you can take to the stage, but some are just, can only like exist in different types of mediums. And it's just kind of interesting. And, thinking too about how would this piece or people's stories, how would that experience differ if we were on a stage and I was sitting in an audience? So I think, exploring this digital landscape has been really interesting. And I think a lot of artists will use it moving forward, which I think is also great to see.
Has anyone seen any?
I was gonna say.
Oh, I was going to ask if anyone's.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to ask: has anyone seen any good Zoom theater over the last year, like during in 2020? You guys all, because that was something that I caught a lot of or participated in, was a lot of Zoom theater.
My university did some play readings, and those were really interesting. I kind of like it when they keep it more to the reading side rather than to incorporate odd things from the Zoom aspect. But for more virtual theater, I've also seen really great things from that, where they were doing stuff on the stage. They could use the option to cut away to do certain set changes in such an easier way than on the stage. So, and to me, there is a difference between like a movie and then like filmed theater, which is like odd. But to me, there's definitely a difference.
Yeah, no, I was able to do one live via Zoom, and I was just curious if anyone else had any experience with doing anything live through like any kind of Zoom broadcast or anything. No,
I saw
only a solo performance.
a solo performance. Okay.
Yeah.
There was a theater in San Diego that I watched. A friend of mine was in a piece, and there were, I think, about 4 people in the show, and I thought it was very effective. Surprisingly, that was my first time to see it, and I was like, "Wow, this is interesting how well this works." And then they could drop out the people who were not actually in the scene and that kind of thing. And it was almost, I mean, it felt like they were in the same room. Like I could feel the table between them where they're sitting talking to each other. And they were in, their own homes at the time. So that's really my only experience, but I thought it worked really well.
Yeah, that was my experience as well. That's a similar. I thought the ones that I saw that worked very well. Was a lot of And Christian, you said you had a solo.
All I did was excuse me. last year for the Reykjavik Fringe Festival, which was my first.
Okay.
I did it a live stream from my living room.
Okay.
But it was just me, still black and white, just like the video that I submitted here. It was a wonderful experience, though, because the festival director did a bookend on the thing. She was basically there for every single show. And so we did a bit of interviewing afterward, which was 2 frames. For me, it was just I had the whole screen. But I have a friend, actually, she was the director of the Summerstock Theater I was in before I was 25 years old, who is now a very prolific playwright, and she had a piece done. It was one of several one-acts about new relationships, people meeting each other, and lovely and charming. And my only problem with the Zoom medium is it's striking at first, and then it's like, okay, I get it now. And who is going to make this an absolutely next level thing? Who's going to be able to do that? There must be thousands of Zoom pieces out there at this point,
Sure.
and it'll take years to sift through them, find
Sure.
the stuff that's immortal.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for joining me here today. I loved hearing about all of your pieces and different, experiences as an artist. Of course, please make sure to check out our website at KC Fringe, and you can learn more about these artists and their shows. I highly encourage you to check them out. You can buy tickets to each individual show, or you can buy 3-day pass, 1-week pass, or a full festival pass. So I encourage everyone to check that out. And thank you for tuning in today. And I encourage you to keep supporting the Fringe and buy tickets, because it allows us to support these artists and give them this platform. So thank you all again for joining me tonight.